These three steps for working out the subdivision, group dwelling and apartment yield of the site is super important for every single property investor, commercial property owner or property developer, because by clearly understanding the maximum yield of your site, you will then be able to either unlock better opportunities or clearly know what your site's true value is. And I can say this with great personal conviction because the most, and I mean the most money that I've made from property development and property investment is when I've understood town planning better than the market and I've uncovered opportunities that the market was not yet pricing in. In this video, I'm going to go through the practical, and I mean the practical steps that you need to take as a property developer, commercial property owner or property investor to maximize your property's best use. Now, the best use of property is very important because by putting the best possible use on the property, you can maximize your return, whether you're selling it to somebody else or developing it yourself. As a property investor, commercial property owner or property developer, when practically applying town planning, a concept or the main concept which you need to understand is best use. Now, effectively, what is best use? Best use is seeking out the tenant or the ultimate buyer that is willing to pay you the biggest premium for the land which you are looking at, or the improvements on the land which you are able to obtain. A practical example of this in residential development might be just simply maximizing the amount of units or apartments that you can put on a block and maximizing the resale price. In a commercial sense, it might be seeking out a tenant that's willing to pay a premium on the current market rent for certain types of property. The final way is through a change of use or a rezoning. Effectively, it is about identifying blocks of land or areas that you feel or can make a good case for changing the zoning or changing the permitted use. Planning is complicated, but when looking at sites, it all boils down to four key components. It's the zoning, density or permitted use, that's the first one. Then it's the building height, how high you can go. Then it's the building bulk, how much of the site you can effectively cover. And finally, it's the parking, how many people can fit on that site for that respective use. Now we have the skeleton idea, how do we actually apply it? Well, the first thing that you need to do is to subscribe to this channel, because if you don't, go down there and go and click subscribe. I am not going to tell you the rest. Moving along to how you practically find out this information. Well, the first thing you do is dig up the town planning scheme map, dig up the town planning scheme itself. The other option is there's a lot of online services which you can use to find out the zoning information, or finally you can pick up and call the council. The first thing I want to show you is the online services. On the count of three, I'm going to click and take you into my computer. Effectively, the way you do it is pretty simple. You jump onto Google and you type in online planning map, then you type in site : yourstate.gov.au. So effectively, if I'm looking for New South Wales, I would type in online planning map, site : nsw.gov.au, and effectively this will bring up an online mapping service that often the state government or the local council has provided. Once you're in the system, effectively what you'll need to do is type in the property address, and then you'll need to change the mapping layers. Depending on what information the council or the state government has in your particular area will dictate the type of information which you will be able to obtain from these online mapping services. As I mentioned before, the other thing worth doing is to call the council when you found a site, which I do as part of a double check against my own due diligence, and often call out, work out what the zoning is, the land size that I have on file, any infrastructure, any policies that affect that particular site, any other planning parameters that I need to consider, because on the phone they can often tell you other bits and pieces and documents which might relate to the proposed development which you are considering. Remembering this information is good as all the other information. There can be human error, so don't take a phone call to the council as a gospel. And if you want gospel-like information, the next thing you can do is you can do what's known as a zoning request, where on a formal letter you write to council, pay a fee, and effectively they come back to you with responses in a general sense. What does a general sense mean? Effectively, if you ask questions around zoning, they can answer, but if you have plans or specific questions to a type of development, they may choose not to answer those. So once I've got all this information, how do I actually practically apply it to a site? Well, let's first talk about group dwelling development. This is fairly simple. The first thing I start with is effectively the area or the building size which I'm going to develop. So I do my market research, I work out effectively what type of product I'm going to bring to the market. If it's, say for example, a 3x2 property, I might consider 110 square meters of internal building area to be the target size which I want to achieve on the property. The next thing I take into account is the car parking. So effectively I add a 36 square meter garage, so we come to about 140 square meters of building area, which takes into account 2 car parking bays plus the 3x2 110 square meters. Then I need to work out how much land I need in order to fit this property on. So I look at things like site cover or plot ratio or gross building area. And if it's, say for example, a site ratio cover of 55%, what that means is that the site can only cover, the property can only cover 55% of the site. So effectively I divide that 140 square meters by the 55, and that gives me a land area of approximately 300 square meters. So now I know to get a 110 square meter building on, to get 2 cars on, I need effectively 300 square meters of land. Then what I do is effectively chop my development site up with those 300 square meter blocks. And at the end of this all, effectively I will know how many 3x2 double garage properties I can fit on the development site. For subdivision, the process works fairly similar, but often we skip the first part. Effectively, within certain areas, they'd often have a minimum and average block size that you are allowed to subdivide the land down to. So effectively, what I would do is work out what that possibly is, confirm that there's market demand for that type of land, and then what I would do is chop up the development site into those respective minimum average block sizes. I'm going to go through a practical example of how I map out a subdivisible or group dwelling development site. Effectively for this, what I've said is the block of land is about 900 square meters. The zoning permits an average block size of 450 square meters or a minimum block size of 350 square meters. And the block shape is effectively 20 meters by 45 meters. What do I actually need? Well, I have a bit of paper, I have a pen, and I often have a scale ruler, but today I didn't bring my scale ruler, so I'm going to use this broken ruler. The first thing to do is adopt a scale. So what I'm going to say is every 1 centimeter is equal to 2 meters, and I'll just note this down on the bit of paper. When you're doing the drawings, you always start from the back lot and then work to the front. So the first lot, we're going to aim for a minimum block size of 350 square meters. So what I effectively do is get 350 and divide it by the width, the entire width of the block, which is 20 meters. This works out to 7.5 meters, which on our scale is effectively 8.75 centimeters. So let's draw that back lot in. Then we need to work out the driveway, and as I know from my planning regs, the driveway width is about 4 meters. So what I do is put a 2 centimeter wide driveway down to the rear lot. Remembering that because of the driveway, the front lot has become narrower. So what we do is 20 meters minus the 4 meters of driveway, and effectively that gives us 16 meters of width. But how do we work at the span of that lot? Well, that's pretty simple. Effectively, what we do is the entire width of the lot, which is 40 meters, minus the 17.5 meters, which we've taken off for the rear lot. This gives us 22.5 meters times the 16 meter frontage, which we already have, effectively gives us 360 meters. Because both the lot size are 350 and 360, effectively this site would be considered compliant, and therefore we should be more than likely able to subdivide it. For apartment and commercial development, it's a little bit different. What we need to work out up front is the plot ratio or gross building area or site cover. Effectively, we want to know the max amount of volume that we can put on this block of land. Once we've worked out the max amount of volume which we're allowed to put in the land, we need to work on how many stories it's going to take to achieve this level of density. So what we do is we work out the setbacks on this particular site, and this will give us the amount of effective area that we are allowed to put our building footprint on. We also then deduct any site cover ratios that we need to take into account, and we can add back the setback area if we choose to. Then we need to work out how much of the building structure we're selling versus how much of the building structure is common area. The rule of thumb I effectively use is each floor loses about 30% of its area to things like stairwells and lift wells, and also access to the apartments or commercial property itself. This is called floor efficiency. So once we work this out, the next thing we want to do is divide our total development space that we're allowed to do by each individual floor's effective area, and this will give us the amount of stories which we need to build the property to. To be conservative, I always always then round up to the next story, and then I go back to the town planning scheme and confirm that the building height is not in excess of the amount of stories which is permitted. If it is, you need to take those levels off and you need to effectively work out how much plot ratio space you then have on the reduced height building, which will dictate the amount of yield you can potentially get out of the development. The next thing I work out is my composition of apartments. And the way I do this is effectively divide the effective area by the amount of floors I'm building by, say, 80 square meters. And the reason why I use 80 square meters is one-bedroom apartments are effectively 50 to 60 square meters, and two-bedroom apartments are 70 to 80 square meters, and three-bedroom apartments might be 100 110 square meters. Remembering, if it's a better area, I might increase this average benchmark up, and if it's an investor product that I'm trying to squeeze more properties onto the site, I might reduce this down. But effectively, that will tell me the amount of units that I can fit on that particular development site. Once I have the total amount of units, the next thing I need to establish is the car parking. So I go back to the town planning scheme, work out how many parks I need per apartment, and then I go to the ground floor and confirm that I can fit that amount of car bays in. If I can't fit that amount of car bays in, I then have to potentially look at scaling back the development and what that looks like in terms of return, or adding the additional cost of basement or an additional level for car parking. These three steps for working out the subdivision, group dwelling and apartment yield of the site is super important for every single property investor, commercial property owner or property developer, because by clearly understanding the maximum yield of your site, you will then be able to either unlock better opportunities or clearly know what your site's true value is. As I come to the end of the video, I always like to share with you other money-making tips under town planning. Now, the first tip, as always, is subscribe to my channel, because if you subscribe, you'll get more of these tips. So go down there and click the subscribe button, because then you'll get the tips. If not, I'm not going to tell you. So go down there and subscribe. The first one is council contributions. This is a planning matter, but you need to work out how the council determines council contributions for your particular development site. Because if you're planning a particular type of development and there are massive contributions, this can have a significant impact on the financial feasibility of that particular development. Rezoning is a massive opportunity for every commercial property owner, property investor or property developer, because this way you don't even have to develop the land in order to unlock extra upside. Effectively, what you want to do is see where councils are looking to rezone land in 2, 3, 5, 10 or 20 years, and if you opportunistically purchase sites, you might unlock a windfall. The easiest way to do this, or get an understanding of which potential areas are getting rezoned, is again to jump onto Google, type in rezoning site:yourstate.gov.au. The next one is density bonuses, and effectively in many town planning schemes and policies, the council encourages certain types of development. These reasons can include green building, retaining buildings, it can be locational aspects such as corner, and it might be mixed use development. So what I like to do is get a clear understanding of which council is giving certain density opportunities, and then what I like to do is find sites that haven't been advertised with that additional density, because the market may have overlooked it and effectively it has not been priced into what the agent is asking. So until your next deep dive into maximizing a site's best use, or my next video, best of luck and goodbye.